Being alone was the nascent stage of my pain. It was the epicenter of my constant fall. I saw and relished it because it meant that I could lie to myself over and over that I did not need anyone, and sell that same lie to people who were forced to swallow the bitter pill. This was no truth at all. The void was deep, the chasm was cavernous. I ignored it and chimed the painful joys of solitude. Some days, I saw myself attempt to reach out and grasp any form of human interaction I could feel vibrating my way, but always I turned my flinty gaze inward and expressed ennui. This must have been too much to bear for others. For they felt that I oozed pride as I rejected their offer of companionship. Meanwhile, it felt excessive on my own part to add their interactions to my cup of tea. I did not want a part in any community, none at all, or so fear led me to hold on to and believe. I just could not one another other people, so I avoided community life like the plague itself. That was where she met me. A loner walking the dark aisle by myself, holding myself in, and taking deep breaths that spewed fatigue. She extended her hand, and I slapped it off. I can take care of myself, I thought to myself. She followed after me like some lost puppy. I wondered if she was anything but sane. But I continued on as nothing else mattered to me other than placing one foot before the other. The journey took longer than necessary. The dark stretched a bit more than I anticipated. I couldn't see the path before me. I sensed luminescence behind me and turned to find a torch in the hand I slapped away. She smiled and shrugged at me but continued to follow me anyway. I thought hard, decided, and slowed my pace till we walked side by side. My path became illuminated. My feet did not stumble as they did before. She neither spoke to me nor stopped walking.
I noticed a bump on the road some meters away. I was going to look away and act like it was none of my business, classic loner move. But I realized that it laid in her path, and her ankle would hurt from their awkward connection. I pointed it out to her before she walked into it. She smiled at me and sidestepped away from potential harm in quick succession. I nodded at her and continued on, the torch in her hand wavering but for a second. I felt my chest constrict, but the pain was bearable. The light I expected at the end of the aisle burst forth from within me, and soon enough I lit the entire alley. In the corners, I found dejected people huddled separately as a collective. They rose slowly to get a feel of my light. Funnily, I did not push them off, and that puzzled me. Instead, I allowed them to run their hands over me, as my light beamed yet so brightly. As they touched me, they too began to radiate. I remembered her just then and turned around in search of her. She was at the very edge of the tunnel, having been pushed further away from me by the desperate crowd. The torch was no longer in her hand, for she shone too brightly to need it. She smiled at me with deep affection in her eyes, raised the slapped hand to me in salute, and disappeared. The once dark alley was overwhelmed by the sea of lights that bubbled in it. A community had been birthed right in its present darkness, with me at the very center of it. Who would have thought?